The Kalos League was the most well-received Pokemon League we've ever had, but was it really as good as we remember it? Well, today I'm going to brutally break down the Kalos League by revisiting each battle, giving them a rating out of 10, and seeing if the Kalos League really was as good as we remember it being. Ash's journey through the Kalos League starts out even before the first battle by getting an interview from Malva where he's confident he's going to win the whole tournament. I really liked the fact that they did this before he'd battled anyone, as it felt so wholesome after what had happened in recent times, and additionally this gave any trainers listening into the interview basically a pre-warning that is, hey, I am him and you are screwed if you fight against me. However, this definitely rubs some people the wrong way, I'm sure, and this could have even cost him the league, but I'll get onto that later. At the arrival ceremony, we get introduced to all of the characters competing that we've seen over the series, as well as who their first battle will be against. Sawyer, Ash and Tiana were matched up against complete randos, but somehow Alan and Trevor both matched up against each other as the first match. Considering there were 32 different matches happening in the first round, the odds of that are crazy, but as soon as you saw this matchup, you knew exactly why they were doing this. And after Diantha's speech, the Kalos League battles had begun. Alan vs Trevor was of course the first bout that we saw, and it was about as predictable as anything, but this was definitely just made for the double Charizard showdown. And I wouldn't really be against this, except for the fact I completely forgot Alan's Charizard one-shot Trevor's with a flamethrower, and I kinda wish this went on just a little longer. Of course we knew Alan was going to win without a shadow of a doubt, but considering they hyped up a spectacle of a Mega Charizard face-off, I kinda wish Trevor's could have taken at least one hit before going down. This is where Ash headed off for his fight as he was in the second one, whilst Trevor sent out his Aerodactyl, which also seemed to get one-shot by a Lynch Charizard. However, remember how I mentioned that the interview Ash did almost cost him the entire league? Something I neglected to mention earlier on is that after his talk with Malva, a trainer approached him for a battle, and this was cut short before it even started, purely because he needed to actually sign up for the tournament. The guy was basically just salty that he didn't get enough gym badges in time, and wanted to prove a point to the guy who said he wanted to win the whole thing that he was strong. And Ash made the mistake of promising to fight him the next time they met, and this same dude got ahead of him and stopped him in the corridor whilst he was heading towards his Kalos League debut, so a fight broke out. Ash did acknowledge his strength, and Pikachu took some heavy shots, and at this point Trevor had just lost his third Pokemon Florges and the battle was over, leaving Ash on the timer to wrap up the fight. And oh boy did he cut it close, but he made it just in time, leaving that rando with a Farfru in the dust. I really like the symbolism of that exchange though, even if it nearly cost him the entire league. It really reminds you that it's not all sunshine and rainbows for different trainers around the region, some just don't make it, and it's important to remember that. As both battles happened simultaneously, I'll rank them both now, as it just felt a bit odd to rank Alan vs Trevor midway through talking about something completely different. Unfortunately, Alan vs Trevor is gonna have to be a 2 out of 10 for me, as we didn't see much and it was way too predictable to be enjoyable. And as for Ash's battle, I'm going to give that a solid 6 out of 10, as it wasn't the craziest match of all time, but it did what it wanted to do without causing any harm. Anyways, moving on to Ash vs Titus, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't even know his opponent had a name until rewatching this, and it's a pretty cool one at that. They started off with a lot of momentum actually, hitting Greninja with a Dragon Pulse head on, and then followed by a Draco Meteor. This is where Ash then linked up with Greninja to stun everyone in the arena by changing into his Battle Bond form, where they avoid the incoming damage, and after one Water Shuriken, his Altaria got destroyed, and even that is an understatement. Similar to Alan vs Trevor, I wish this lasted just a little longer than one attack, and hey, it was really cool, but that's all we saw from his first battle in the Kalos League. This is something I think the Kalos League struggled with a lot, especially early on, in comparison to the Alola League and the Masters 8 tournament, although in retrospect, it does make sense as we just saw him fight that rando, so I'm kind of on the fence with it. We knew the first rounds were going to be a cakewalk for Ash, or at least not too bad, but personally, I wanted to see more in the beginning. It's the exact same with Tiana and Sawyer, we didn't see anything of their battles actually. I'm glad they got through, but I just personally like to see some evidence of it, that's all. I completely understand that it's probably just a me thing, and I accept that wholeheartedly. It's just one of the many criticisms that I have that I don't hear many people talk about. As for the rating of Ash vs Titus, from what we saw, I can only give it a 6 out of 10. 10, but if this battle was shown in full, it could have easily bumped up a few more ratings. They did the exact same with Ash vs Astrid, where they showed Ash defeating her Mega Absol, but that's it. Again, I just wish we got to see a bit more of that, because that's such a big achievement for Hawlucha, and they just glossed over it like it was nothing. Fun fact for those who don't know, but this is also a mini revenge fight too, as they had previously fought in the Diancie movie, so although I'm glad we saw it, I just felt like we deserved a bit more from a quarter-final match. And for that reason, I'm going to rank this even lower at a 4 out of 10. Weirdly, the next fight we saw was Sawyer vs Tiano, and this was a surprisingly long match compared to what we'd seen so far. Tiano's Ludicolo was absolutely rocking his Aegislash for quite some time, as the clever combo of Rain Dance and Swift Swim made it super fast and hard to deal with, which I'm really glad about because Ludicolo is just the GOAT for that. It wasn't that for too long though, because after Sawyer raised Aegislash's attack with Sword Stance, the battle was done very quickly, and I kinda wish it was the other way around, but hey, it was still a good fight nonetheless. Raichu then swiftly dealt with his Aegislash right after, bringing it down to a 2 vs 2. Sawyer then sent out his Slurpuff on a mission to rizz up his Raichu, and it went way too smoothly for something that looks like, well, that. He then replaced his Raichu with Blastoise, and after Sawyer tried the same strategy again, he decided enough was enough and obliterated the Slurpuff with a Hydro Cannon. And yeah, I don't really blame him for this one. Anyway, Sceptile versus Blastoise time, and yeah, this pretty much explains it. It kinda reminded me of Lance versus Diantha from the Masters 8, but with Sawyer actually knowing how to dodge attacks the entire time, whereas Tiano lost basically the one thing that made him strong, as his rhythmic battling style generally made him way harder to hit. This left Tiano with just his Raichu against Sceptile, and he was in a really good spot. Setting up Rain Dance just before losing Blastoise was great for the next part of his plan. Or at least, so he thought anyway. His plan was to use Thunder, which as we know literally cannot miss in the rain, and it landed alright. Too bad Sawyer Mega evolved his Sceptile just in time to gain the Lightning Rod ability, so all this did was damage Tiano's dreams rather than Sceptile. This is incredible from a writer's perspective, and I love this idea, and this plays so well into Sawyer's character as an analytical battler. He then finished off Tiano's Raichu with a final Dragon Claw to end the battle, and what a random but interesting matchup. This battle is pretty solid, and with a few minor tweaks could have been absolutely peak, but I'd say 7 out of 10 is fair for this one. This set the stage for the semi-finals, and the matches were exactly what we were looking for. I can't help but wonder how the world would have reacted if it was Sawyer versus Alan and Remo versus Ash. It would have never happened in a million years, but I think it would have been so funny, which is something I definitely have to credit the Kalos League for. The matchups we actually saw were pretty much all meaningful in one way or another, which definitely gives it the edge over the Masters 8 tournament for me so far. With the semi-finals on the horizon, the format changed from a 3 vs 3 to a 6 v 6, and Ash only had 5 Pokemon at this point, which only meant one thing. Thankfully, it was the return of Goodra instead, which at first seemed great, but we'd come to realise as we go on, it wasn't how we imagined it. The semi-finals started similar to how the Masters 8 semi-finals started, where it was Alan kicking Remo's ass in the exact same fashion that Leon decimated Diantha. And I have the exact same feelings as I did with that battle. I just wish we'd seen a bit more of it, especially considering it's a semi-final match. Listen, I knew the Kalos League was going to be absolutely trivial for Alan, but I just wish we saw a bit more of his other Pokemon before his eventual match in the finals. As a comparison, they did this brilliantly with Sawyer, and considering he had so much more screen time, I feel like we definitely could have seen this happen, but again, maybe this is just a me thing. Also, low-key, Remo should be embarrassed that his Rhyperior got slapped up by a Charizard that badly. I don't care how strong that lizard is, it should not be winning that quickly under any circumstance. Following that was Charizard versus Garchomp, which by the way is such an awesome nickname for a Garchomp, I actually love it. It was a really cool fight and there was no real complaints about that one. So this lands at around a 6 out of 10 for me, as I wasn't exactly hyped for it, but it was still good, you know. The semi-finals continued with Ash versus Sawyer, and the leading battle was Hawlucha versus Slacking, and I have a lot of thoughts about this one. Sawyer was incredibly smart to use a Pokemon with such a different battle style up against Hawlucha, and this worked in his favour perfectly. Hawlucha just never seemed to lock in and got caught when it wasn't expecting it, and I will admit it was pretty funny to see it get yeeted into the trees with a single counter. However, as this is a brutal breakdown, other than that one moment, it wasn't that entertaining of a battle, and I just felt like I was watching a stall team spamming Protect on Pokemon Showdown. Especially as I'm a big fan of Hawlucha, he's probably my favourite Kalos team member other than Greninja, and to see him go down in such a way just felt so underwhelming as a viewer. Luckily, Talonflame dealt with that stupid sloth in record time, and watching this back, I literally celebrated despite knowing it was happening. Oopsies. Sawyer went by the book and followed up with the Clawitzer, and this helped him get ahead of Ash yet again thanks to a collision of Aqua Jet and Flame Charge, resulting in Talonflame's demise. It was really interesting to see how Clawitzer would fly beside Talonflame with its Aqua Jet, which was great to see how Sawyer was inventing his own unique strategies to deal with his Pokemon's weaknesses, as well as adapting to how Ash battles. Also, the way we saw Talonflame emerge from the collision with the squiggly eyes is so funny to me. Like, why is it upside down, dude? Ash then sent out Pikachu and put on a masterful display the only way they know how. Using the forest to stay out of sight and attacking from the shadows is perfect for them, and Clawitzer just couldn't keep up. And when it finally clamped its Iron Tail to get it still, I think Sawyer forgot that Pikachu could still use its electric type moves. And that's what wrapped up the fight between these two. This matchup was just really well executed, and I really enjoyed it. Aegislash was the Pokemon out next for Sawyer, and here comes what I believe to be Ash's clutchest strategy so far, and I'm a big fan of this one. Pikachu went back into the trees to avoid damage like before, but Aegislash had different plans, and instead of following him, it chopped down all the trees it ran through. This is where the first episode of the battle left off, and I really like the way this started, other than Hawlucha getting pummeled into a tree, of course. And the next episode started off really weirdly for some reason. Like, the King Shield was fine, but why is Pikachu run straight into Aegislash with Sacred Sword at the ready? I understand Sawyer's strategy was to limit Pikachu's movement, but did it want to get hit by it? This has always confused me, especially considering Aegislash doesn't exactly chase after Pikachu at this point. It only actually gets the move ready. And after using Thunderbolt, Ash notices something, and this is where his strategy comes into play. He starts off by telling Pikachu to use Iron Tail on the ground, lifting up all the logs off the floor and into the air. This not only allows Pikachu to move around more freely, but also gives him the opportunity he's looking for. He baits Sawyer into thinking he's going to attack, forcing Aegislash to use King Shield. Ash then calls for Pikachu to push a log into the spot where it usually slips into, causing Aegislash to get stuck and not be able to move, allowing him to finally hit it and end the battle with a Thunderbolt. Even to this day, I can't express how smart this strategy is, and I have no idea how the writers came up with it, but it's genius and I love it. This is where Pikachu finally gets the well-earned rest it deserves as the battlefield changes to Badlands, which is also where we get the completely fresh matchup between Ash's Noivern and Sawyer's Salamence, and this was mid versus mid, I'm not gonna lie. Like, it was cool, don't get me wrong, but a draw just isn't at all that interesting when the battle lasted like a minute or two to me, and unfortunately the exact same thing happened with Gudra versus Slurpuff. Despite the fact that they both ended as draws, they each have their positive sides as well that I quickly like to talk about. It was nice to see Noivern get some quote-unquote love, as it had been Ash's weakest team member for a very long time, so to see it take out a pseudo-legendary Pokemon like Salamence was really nice, even if it did get knocked out at the same time. As for Gudra, its entire backstory as a Gumi was being terrified of fairy types thanks to the Florges that rocked up to its homeland, and watching it defeat one on a big stage felt like its story came full circle, which was a really good callback. Before the grand finale, we briefly saw Pikachu return to take on Sceptile, and it was so worn out from earlier that it just didn't stand a chance against his ace, but landing a Thunderbolt mid-air was pretty cool. I will say though, this frenzy plan to put Pikachu to sleep was so brutal, poor guy did not deserve that treatment, and with one Pokemon left on either side, we got what we were waiting for. In the past, they have fought against each other and won once each when they were fully evolved, and the hype for this result was at an all-time high, and oh boy, they definitely lived up to the expectations that we all had. The animation, the choreography of the battles, the intensity of Ash constantly getting pushed back, and ultimately the final water shuriken to end off the battle, it was all perfect. gifts. And this was a great end to the rivalry that we all expected and felt like we deserved, which is another thing it definitely does better than a lot of other Pokemon leagues. But that's a conversation for another day. And because this was the best moment of the league by far, as much as I have nitpicked about this battle at times, I still think it's incredible, so I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10. It is very close to a 9 out of 10 though. And this is how you start a battle of the highest standards. Pikachu versus Tyranitar was absolutely peak. The strategies were just sublime, like Pikachu clearing the sandstorm by splashing water everywhere, as well as Alan breaking his own Stone Edge to try and hit Pikachu. This of course did kind of backfire, but what a great sequence of events this was. The pacing was just incredible, I loved it. Noivern versus Weavile was up next, and man, I feel so bad for Noivern. It got stitched up so badly by fighting it against an ice type. It's usually a bottle job, don't get me wrong, but for once this loss is very understandable, so I'll take it. And this also created a mini revenge story for Hawlucha, and oh boy did he get him back good. In my opinion, this was also a lot better of a version of Hawlucha against Slacking, not just because he won, although that is true to an extent. It just felt a lot more interactive somehow, and less one-sided of an outcome, and this made a big difference between the two in my opinion. However, this is where the battle did kind of fall off for a bit, as Alan's Bishop started spamming Guillotine, finishing off Hawlucha, which is so incredibly lame after landing a Thunder Wave, it's crazy. It just seemed like a way to keep Alan in the fight at this point. And despite Talonflame versus Unpheasant being a draw, at least they animated it incredibly well. This battle looked phenomenal. With 3 Pokemon down on both sides, the field changed to grassland and Pikachu versus Metagross commenced, and I always forget how good this battle is. I'm not quite sure how Pikachu is held on through a Metal Claw, Rock Slide that buried him alive, and then a Meteor Mash in quick succession, but I respect it, man, he's the GOAT for that. And then it performs the comeback of the century with that brutal Thunderbolt on top of Metagross, followed by an Iron Tail to the dome. Man, Pikachu really was the MVP of this fight. To quickly recap, it took out 2 pseudo-legendary Pokemon single-handedly and did some damage to Alan's Charizard before going down as well. What a shift from the lad, honestly. I respect the hell out of it. And they ruined Bishop's back. And man, he should have been KO'd by that Bide as well. Ugh. At least Greninja obliterated it with a Water Shuriken right away, thank God. And here we are, Ash and Greninja versus Alan and Charizard. And there is so much to talk about with this battle, it's crazy. Every little detail was just amazing, from blocking Blast Burn with the Water Shuriken at the ground, to also fighting Thunder Punch with it, just to name a few things, was simply incredible. Overall, similar to his semi-final match actually, Ash versus Alan was absolutely peak, and at least personally, the result doesn't bother me too much. And because of this battle being a personal 9.5 out of 10, I think this slots perfectly between the Masters 8 tournament and the Alola League at a 9 out of 10.